obviously. One can't fly along in the sky and create all this composition. It could be done with a photographer and a very expensive format where he gets all these 5 aircraft flying for him in the same sky. But in this, I'll tell you why this is, in this particular instance, it would be almost impossible, because he wanted a Vickers Valiant. There aren't any of those flying at the moment. Panavia Tornado, well, that is flying, but to get a GR Mark 1 in this condition would be very rare. A Hunter FR-10 by the Omani forces, and in Oman, which again would be difficult. A Bullfighter TT-10, now there aren't any of these around, and a Hawker Harrier. Well, you can see that this would be an impossible situation for a photographer to create, absolutely. So the artist now has this one advantage over the cameraman. He can compose his own composition and painting.
Now, now the first thing, of course, an aviation artist needs is reference books. Reference books by the millions, really. The more the merrier. And here we are, some of mine stored up against one of my studio walls. As you can see, stacks and stacks of them, all references coming back along the lower shelves. Air Enthusiast, Air International, and on the other wall even more, miles and miles and miles of books built up over the years as an enthusiast. Now in this case, of course, we have 5 aircraft to contend with, and I have sorted out the 5 aircraft, as many books as I can on that one aircraft, the Hunter, Harrier, Tornado, etc., and start to wade through them.
In the, let's take one aircraft, for instance, the Hawker Hunter, and I've got dozens and dozens of books on Hunters, but I will go through these books looking for a nice perspective. I've already decided to compose a painting where the aircraft are coming towards you. Not that's too much of a side view, for instance, you see. I will try and pick a perspective that I think that will work. There's one there. That's too much plan view. That's an underneath view. All these views, I look through them and look through them. I spend maybe a day just going through these various perspectives. When I see a perspective I particularly like in this one here, I make a tracing of it. Here we go. I trace very quickly, very sharp, quickly make a tracing. And as I go through the various magazines, I will make quick tracings of each one, and I'll look at them all. It's best to do it this way because it takes away the distraction of the photograph and its background, and I can see purely the perspective. There's one coming towards you, even more so, but a very close-up view is too close-up for me. There's another close-up view because the perspective shows the nose too large, and you can see this much better when you trace it out with a pen. That's not a bad view. That's probably a nice view, but the aircraft are coming towards me, and I think the client won't see too much of the markings in that view. That's not a bad one. That's too much from the front. I do this with each of the aircraft, the Tornadoes and the Valiants and so forth, and eventually I'll take one of them and cut it out, like this one here. I'll cut it out, and then making an enlargement of it, I'll stick it to format like that, which is proportion of the painting I want, a 20 by 30 inch canvas, same proportion, and I enlarged that hunter there, and there it is there, positioned along with the same exercise I've done with the Tornado, the Valiant, and the Harrier, and so forth. And I juggle these around, juggle them around until I get the right proportion. At this stage, I've done some enlarging, but I'm not happy, for instance, with the size of the Valiant. It's the largest of the aircraft, and I've positioned it behind the scenes, otherwise it would dominate too much. But this takes quite a lot of juggling around, enlarging, reducing, and positioning them so that the perspectives show them flying in some sort of formation. I'm going to make the Harrier the closest aircraft, and I think I'll make it even larger than the way I've done it here. I'm going to make that one slightly larger. I might reduce the size of some of these, but this stage is very important, because until you've resolved all this, there's no point in going ahead with the rest of the canvas. Most enthusiasts, aviation enthusiasts, will probably skip a lot of this hard background work because they want to get on with the painting. That's one of the biggest mistakes. Resolve all these problems now before you go any further, because it'll save a lot of heartache and rework afterwards. So as you can see, now the positioning here I've created so that there is some overlap, which helps to create that the aircraft is flying, one aircraft is flying in front of the other. If I jotted them around too scattered, it would look like rather a messy painting. Could be a messy painting anyway, but it's a very difficult one. So I'm going to enlarge the Valiant, make the Harrier here a bit bigger. The Bullfighter can be a little bit bigger too, I think. And I work all of this out. After doing that exercise, I traced down my final approved sizes, again very roughly, but I just darkened it out just to make sure that the composition looks reasonably happy. The aircraft scattered around, I've just darkened them a bit. Now here, and I've dimensioned the various aircraft, so when I come to getting the references, I know what sizes I want to make these up onto. But the next and most important stage now comes next, and that is to get the tonal arrangements made. Now this, as I said before, is by far the most important stage of creating this composition. The most important stage, i.e. to work out the light and dark areas. Far more important than actual colour. Now I know the Valiant is a white aircraft and the Bullfighter is a silver aircraft, or a natural aluminum aircraft. And I'm going to play one of my usual tricks, and that is to have the sun behind this formation of aircraft, so that this part of the sky is going to be very light. And in which case I can now allow myself to make this white aircraft slightly darker, because it's going to be in shadow, or it's on the shadow side of the aircraft. So although it's a white aircraft, it's going to be in shadow, or on the shadow side will be facing us. So these areas allow me then to play up darkish, and I say it's not darkish, but white darkish areas against the light background. And by using cloud and light, I can now start to work out some of the other areas. This silvery aircraft, I've decided here that the silvery aircraft this area will be lighter than the background. The background here will be darker, probably using cloud to make it look dark. At this stage I haven't worked out why it's going to be dark, but it is going to be dark. I can design my clouds to suit. It won't be pure white, of course. This is purely a tonal composition. This area I've decided will be quite dark here. And I'll work in charcoal because it's such an immediate medium to allow me to do this. It's going to be the Harrier. It's a grey-green aircraft, and this tail fin is going to be quite dark against the background, and so is all this area here, and intake, of course. This is going to be the darkest, because it's nearest aircraft. That's all going to be very dark, sort of lightening on top there. That's going to be my darkest aircraft. And I'm have to establish it. There's no point in hoping it's going to work out in the end. Sometimes, of course, you do have to resolve that, but here we go. Something dark in here. This hunter is slightly less dark. It's in similar colours to the Harrier in front, but because of the tonal recession, it'll be slightly less dark, and of course the Tornado even less dark again. So dark, slightly darker, and darkest. I'll put those three in that sort of progression there. Now, this is going to be slightly darker, of course, than because it's a darkish aircraft than here. And so that's going to come off just slightly lighter, because that's a white aircraft. These are going to be a grey-green aircraft, so they're darker. This can be just a touch darker. You notice I'm not paying too much attention to shape. It's purely a tonal drawing. And it's, again, as I said earlier, the most vital part of the composition. Work this out and the rest of the painting literally will fall together. Work this all out. Now I want this area to be slightly lighter on here. This silver aircraft, or this silver, will be picking up some of the background colours of those clouds in the sky. That wing there will be nice and white against the colours here. It's a little darker here. This area can be quite dark to show off the silver aircraft a bit more. Yeah? And then I can put, this can be cloud. This dark area here can be described as a cloudy area. Maybe some of it coming up to encompass the wing of the Valiant above. So we can get some little light change shade there. So this will be cloud. Darken it even more if you wish. Make a nice counterbalance to that weight of the aircraft over there. The darks here. And this can be a slightly tonal recession here because the sunlight is over here. On our right, the sky can progress from the light area on our right through to a dark area here. So let's do this a little bit more neatly. There you go. Don't forget, you can use some of these little tricks like light rays to lighten up areas and clouds to darken areas. And the sunlight's going to be coming from there. And I'll just put a few suggestional lines where the sunlight might be. And as you can see, this is going to work. I can see this right now, this aircraft in the near ground, that in the far ground, but dark against the light. And I can take up some of this here, lightening areas. Now, having spent considerable time in making sure you've got everything worked out, then you can get on, and only then, I will emphasize that, only then get on to the canvas. But first, I have to enlarge those small sketches into the final size that is going onto the canvas. And there is the tracing for the hunter, which I've worked out to the right proportions to a 30 by 20 canvas, as you can see here. Now this is transferred onto my canvas just using ordinary carbon paper. I'm not going to go through this whole process, but it's quite easy to understand. Putting the carbon underneath and tracing it through onto the canvas. I might spend quite a lot of time researching the colours and so forth of the aircraft. This is very important because it saves a lot of time when one is painting to sort of have to stop all the time and refresh one's memory. It's nice to have these around, but this sort of thing is very important to have your colour references, worked out which ones are going to use, the markings and so on and so forth. And I'm not going to go into the painting of the background, unfortunately. I've already done that. That'll be something I can do on another time, at another time. But I will now go on to the painting of one of the aircraft, and that is the bullfighter. This is the silver one, or natural aluminium one, and you will find that I had to struggle with this one just a little bit, so it'll probably be a good exercise.
Aircraft. As you can see, I've already painted in the background and 3 of the aircraft, but I would just like to show how I first started by painting in the background and only suggestions of where the dark and light areas on the aircraft would be, so that I could contrast the aircraft accurately or easily against the background. The bullfighter in the bottom right hand corner is the one I shall be painting next, and as you can see, when I was doing the background I already painted in some of the dark and light areas roughly, so that I could contrast, as I said before, these areas. You notice how I chose to paint the tailplane lighter against the darker background, as opposed to the Valiant just above it, where although that is also a white aircraft, you notice I've got a darker tailplane against the lighter clouds in that instance. The bullfighter is a silver painted aircraft, and here I've chosen to paint the tailplane light, whereas in some other areas the contrast will be dark against light. I'll just zoom in a bit on to the bullfighter there. You can see the tracing lines and the roughed dark and light areas against the background, whereas the Valiant above it, you see the chosen darker white in inverted commas tailplane, whereas the elevators, as you can see with the light falling on it, the elevators are lighter there. Here we have the nose, light and darks. The main planes there are light, whereas on the Tornado, the tailplane there is darker, the wings in some areas darker and others in light. The Hunter, here we have the dark and light areas contrasted out, and the Harrier, which will be done last. There's the Harrier, you can see there. I've already suggested where the light and dark areas will be. Well, now I shall concentrate on and I'll do the tailplane first.
Now the colors I've been using so far are Viridian and Magenta. I've used those two more or less throughout the painting, with the addition of cadmium yellow and cadmium red. These two, the Viridian and the Magenta, give me a nice contrast of greys, between warm and cool greys. See here, there's more Viridian than the Magenta here, whereas elsewhere the balance will be thrown in. The bright sunlight areas, of course, using some of the cadmium yellow and red up at the top. But so these two colors now are going to be used with the addition of white for painting in the tailplane, and I'm just mixing it on the palette here now. There's a Magenta, there's a Viridian, a bit of white, and that color is now going to be just a touch of medium applied here. I just want to see the contrast of that against the background. Is that enough contrast? I'm not sure about that just yet, because it could be lighter, it could be darker. If I want to darken it, again I mix a little bit more Viridian and Magenta together to get the right balance. And here we are, some more medium. Now, I might resort to using a little bit of cadmium red and yellow at this stage if I want to get away from that sort of slight pinkiness, which is really alright, which is the main colours of the painting. You don't want to get too far away, but as there is cadmium yellow and red elsewhere, I shall just experiment here and try a touch of the two in this my. There's the cadmium red and yellow. I'm just going to, it might be too disastrous. I have a tendency to experiment on the canvas quite often when I want to get the right effects. So there's the cadmium yellow. It's a little bit too, I'll put a bit more red magenta in with it and see how that goes. Just might I can't just see how that affects. It's slightly better, not quite what I want. I'm just now add a little bit of white in with that, a bit more magenta, and see how that goes. The two cadmium colours, taking it away just a touch from the background. I could do it probably with a hint of meridian into it. See, this is my, what I get right here, when I get this colour right here, then I can proceed with the rest of the aircraft. This is a flattish area of the tailplane, and it wants to convey the impression to the eye, to the beholder, to the viewer, that it is a silver painted aircraft. There is no silver paint, of course, that I'm using. It's got to convince me that it's silver looking. I've just added a touch more cadmium red in with the cadmium yellow there, along again with the meridian and magenta. And I've got a sort of peculiar warm, dirty grey, which on its own, the funny colour there. I don't know if you can sort of evaluate that. But in context on the canvas, I think it's just about right. It could do with a little bit of lightening up, possibly, but I'm not going to jump into that just yet. It wants to be silver paint in shadow, with the light falling on these clouds reflecting back into it. And this canvas is wet. I hate working on dry canvas, so I'm just going to run my brush over this area, which has been dipped into some medium. The medium, by the way, is a mixture of turps and some oil, linseed oil, with a drop of what's that stuff called? Liquid. Turps and liquid. Liquid is not an oil paint as such, it's a synthetic oil, and it helps to dry it be a little bit quicker. But as I'm not too keen on very quick drying, I don't use too much of it. What it does do is gives the texture of the oil a nice consistency, which I rather like. Now, before I go any further, here we have, I want to see how I'm going to paint the silver on that far tailplane. So I'm going to mix up some white with a little bit of cadmium red and yellow. That's that mixture I had before. Cadmium red and yellow there. And I'm going to put that on this tailplane here. See the contrast against the background. That's too light, but anyway, it's given me a starting point. That's a little bit too light, I think. But we'll see. Notice it's going to give me a nice contrast. What I did that for was to see what contrast I was going to get on this tailplane. And I have a feeling I want this darker. I want that area darker. Let me just tone that down just a bit. I'll pick up paint from here and put that on here. Pick up a little bit more here. And put that on there. That's giving a slight sort of, just tone tone it down just a little bit there. I think when I come to paint that tailplane, I'll put more yellow with it, like that. That'll look better when I do that. That's a decision. I'll remember that when I come to do it. And here we'll have the same sort of white area thing going through there, with shadow of that pin on it. I'll do that later, but that's just to give me a starting point. We'll have light coming from the sun falling on this area here, so I'll just put that in. There. It's very dry, this canvas, and so the brushes of it. So I'm dipping it, just dipping it in a little bit of medium to make it run a bit smoother over that area. Decision time is whether to make this area lighter or darker than the background. I thought I'd worked all of this out, but obviously you can't do all of this at one time. There's too many aircraft for me to get too involved in the early stages, and I do leave some of these decisions to later. So I shall see what happens. First of all, if I just run a highlight along the top of this fin, will that be sufficient? I hope the camera can see this. It'll be strengthened later, of course. So I would like to make this darker. Let's go darker. Stop pussyfooting around. Viridian magenta and a touch of that red and yellow in it as well. And let's go darker here. And let's go now here, darker here. Is that going to work? No, don't like that. Add some of that red and yellow to it. Put more magenta with it. A real mixture of colours with this one. The problem here, as I say, is to try and convince the eye that it's a silver aircraft, not a white painted aircraft like the one above, but a silver aircraft. That's where the marking will go. No, the lighter colour is better, I think. But that's a nice background to add some light to it and see how it goes. Some interesting colours in there, which I want to play up, but magenta is still lost to the green, so I'm putting more magenta there. I rather like that magenta. Look, yes. I think with the highlight coming along the top, that will just about work. It doesn't stand out quite at the moment, but doesn't matter. I can strengthen that later. This is all right. And what I'm going to do is make transit from one side to the other. Some little movement. I'm going to lighten this area here. Movement across the tail to a darker area up there, which I think is a nice way to do it. Move some of this down here. That's fine. Now strengthen all these areas up. Now the big I'm now going to paint in this mass here, just getting some tonal area, right? A bit of white, do it in front of you here, a bit of white, a bit of viridian, magenta, I made it before, just a hint of red and yellow, hint of red and yellow there, and scrub all that in with a brush, working it into the canvas so that I can drag and tone my variant in. I like to work on a wet canvas, and when the canvas is dried like it has done now since I last painted all this in, I have to scrub. I use this as an opportunity to wet, as it were, the surface of the canvas with oil. Well, it's a coloured oil with colour in it, right across here. I'm literally pushing the oil colour into between the little grains of canvas there. Now that blue is a little bit too blue. Add a little bit more magenta, touch more red and yellow. Make it a bit darker, more magenta. This area here, I want that darker. Spatter some of that marking I put in there. Getting a bit too lost. Needs a bit of red and yellow into it. That's the cadmium red and cadmium yellow. Get a little bit of warm, with the warm colours, those two. I'll get some warm colours, there's a little bit of warm colours in here. Because I don't want this grey to look too cold. I'm warming it up in comparison with the rest of the aircraft. And I'm assuming, you see, that the sunlight is bouncing on clouds nearest us here and coming back and hitting the surface of the silver painted ball fighter. And this will give us that impression of it's silver. It's still not right there. So a little bit more white with the red and yellow. Here. You notice how I'm all the time I'm doing this, I'm looking back and forward across the whole area so that I can purposely determine what I want. I'm going to paint this area here lighter underneath here. Or is it here? I want it lighter. I want it lighter here, I think. With the impression that there's some light coming back off the clouds here. Red there. Cadmium red, putting some cadmium red into that colour. It's a bit fierce at the moment, but I can kill it off to some extent later on by adding a bit of magenta. Ingredient. It's a difficult exercise, this, and that's why I decided to show this. How I fight exactly in some way. In this particular case, I'm fighting with the problem of a silver aircraft. It's each time I paint, I do like to experiment with different approaches. It keeps me on my toes because it's saves me repeating the same thing over and over again, color-wise and composition-wise and so forth. And here I'm set myself, in fact, the task of this particular one. The client, by the way, wanted these 5 aircraft, and I like the challenge of trying to get them all flying in the same sky. Now this area here is going to be a yellow training band. Well, not training band, it was a trainer. This bullfighter is a target tour. It used to targets for other aircraft or artillery to fire up at it. And so it was painted silver with black and yellow stripes underneath and this yellow band along the side. Now that is more or less the general colour I'm going to use. See, I'm touching a little bit of magenta in here. I just want to warm it up a little bit as I'm coming on the side. Now, it's a bit pale, I know, looking at this stage, but I'm just looking at the overall general colour. What will turn this into a bullfighter shaped fuselage is the addition now of dark and light areas. Now this is a good trick because the sky is darker above us here, and that on a silver aircraft comes up quite distinctly like this, where the areas above show up, and then of course there's going to be some dark underneath here. I approach this quite timidly at this stage, not too ferociously, so treading carefully as I go to see how it works. That's going to be lighter over the top as I go. These nice warm colours here are nice and exciting. I don't want to change the colour that too much. Now, I wonder if I could add some red underneath here. I'm mixing up some cadmium red. This is an experiment, not to be too vicious. Too vicious with the yellow with that. And the colours here for the underneath. Cadmium red underneath there. Eee. More yellow, I think. It needs just a touch more yellow. Yes. There. Sort of like a warm glow, reflecting that coming back off the clouds underneath here. Bring that across here. Graduate it a bit. Graduate it there. Now, here's a little bit of tomfoolery here, a little bit of magenta, yes, mixed in with the, some idea that there are like reflections of different colours coming back, which hopefully will convince the eye that this isn't a one coloured aircraft, but it is in fact is reflecting. Let me make a darker colour up here using the magenta again and the viridian here, just to give a change of pace. Yep, that will work. I can see that's going to work. The surface of the canvas in this area here is now getting to its best state that I like working in, where there is oil colour on the canvas and I'm applying oil colour on top of that oil, and the two mixes, one on top of the other, is blending one into the other. So I put on a strong colour as you saw there, but as soon as I start to work it, it starts to dissolve into the colour underneath, so I can blend from one side to the other. I don't know if you can see that blending, and by cross-hatching and moving, I can move that colour around. So I've got a purpley colour there moving into a cooler colour up the top there, and the colour in between, I could probably make it just whiter, a neutral grey colour, just a bit here, yes, so that it looks now silvery. That little bit of light area there, and there, and bring this color in here. Because the surface, again I'll repeat myself, is wet, when I brush this whitish color on, I can sort of blend it very carefully around and get a change of pace. Now it needs to start just to give a little bit of color, light to the top of this fin, streak here. The sun is up here, and so this area is going to catch quite a bit of sunlight on the top of that fin. And with that lovely curved Bristol fin and rudder, just a hint of light along the top here, at least progressing in the right direction. Progressing in the right direction. Now, bring the paint on the brush has sufficient oil on it, so I can drag it across the darker area underneath here, and just strengthen some of that dark area a bit. This dark area I'm talking about, so I'll put some more of this dark in, because I know when I come across it with my lighter brush it's going to get a bit lighter anyway, so I'll strengthen all that up to create that impression of the fuselage turning over the top. I'll brush some of that dark into the white area, light area that I've just created, bringing the brush down again. It's already been diluted, if you like, a little bit with that. I'll do that just a little bit more. By going back into these areas, like carrying this dark brush into the light area and the light brush into the dark area, I can make my graduations quite easily. See how that is? This area here I'm going to bring down a bit further. I'll do it with my brush, so that the dark area that I've created isn't too localized, to give a little bit of fuller form. This is creating, I'm modeling the surface, if you like. I'm modeling the surface of this aircraft to give the impression of the contours that it really has. So I'm modeling this down just a bit. That's fine. I like to be able to give a bit of darkness underneath here, as I said before. So I'll add a bit of red to the green here. Give that, yes, that's nice. A bit different colouring to the top. Because this fin here will cast a shadow across the fuselage here. Now just mixing up again some Viridian and Alizarin here. And in fact, I've decided all of this will be dark. Now how am I, as I've painted dark because of the shadow cast by that fin, I've got a decision to make. Whether to make the top of that darker, yes I will. It'll still, talking to myself here, it will still give the impression of it having a form, and yet it's a form that's in darkness. Right. And yes, that dark area of the top there does really work. It's picking up, it tells me that that area up the top here is picking up the dark sky above, which you can't see. But usually at this time of the day, the sky above is much, much darker than you really think it is. And that is going to graduate into this bluey green light and the purple. I'm tempted to do this, to exaggerate this even more, because it's working so nicely. This is a dangerous time, but it's worth a try, just to see if that would take a touch darker. Yes. In darkening it, it tends to give the illusion that the area above, that it is a much lighter aircraft than you think at first. Because it's in shadow, you've got to give the impression that it's a light aircraft, i.e. a silver aircraft in shadow, not a dark aircraft in shadow. And by doing that, you can play up some of these contrasts, i.e. where the shadow does fall, you can really make it darker. Here we go. And the area above will obviously, conversely, start to look lighter. See what happens when we do this. Yep. That now hopefully will help to increase the impression of a silver aircraft picking up whatever it's picking up light from this end, which is a white cloud maybe, I don't know, possibly a lightish cloud. I'll come to do this area up front here in a minute. It's still not contrasty enough for me right now, so I'm going to carry on this idea of light and see what happens if I really do plonk from here on the tail plane. It's nearly there, so may as well give the final few strokes. Cadmium red, cadmium yellow. Cadmium red because the cadmium yellow is too yellow as such, and I've got to create the impression of yellow in shadow. Now to do this, I'm putting a bit of magenta with the yellow. Yes, a little magenta with yellow. I'll show you what I'm mixing here. Magenta, yellow, okay, maybe a touch of red, cadmium red, more magenta, and a bit of iridium, maybe. The whole idea is to make a dark impression of yellow in the dark. Let's see whether that's too dark. A bit more yellow, a bit more magenta red, a bit more yellow. Let's see what that's like. Doesn't look like yellow at the moment, but I think it's the right colour. Not far off. Real strange mixture of yellow, cadmium yellow that is, cadmium red, magenta, maybe a touch of iridium in it as well. But I want to play with this for a few minutes and see if it starts to work. And a little bit of suck it and see here at first. Quite apart from that, of course, I've got two other things to contend with. The shape of the fuselage and the tonal change of the colour of the yellow. At the moment I'm just blocking in the yellowish colour just so that I wet more for wetting the canvas than anything else really. And also using this opportunity to determine the shape of the fuselage. Just squeeze some more paint out of the brush there to move it across. Now, as the yellow goes over the top where that dark area is, let's see what it would look like with a little bit more magenta in it. To turn the top, will that look good? Possibly. Not enough there to show. Looks very dirty. Very dirty. I'm not sure I like it as dirty as that, but we'll try it. This area that's more or less flat on to you, let's lighten that with a little more cadmium yellow and see how that punches out. Just to put this. Remember, this is not pure yellow. By the time I've touched the canvas with this sort of dirty colour that I put down, it's already modified into a peculiar yellow grey. I like that. I like that. I might just add a bit of yellow right near the top there, change the space a bit, move it around. That's better. That yellow there, that area will correspond to an area about here of the same intensity. But as the surface turns, it will be the same here. Just fill in the right area, of course. And a touch more of that yellow there. The area, touch of red, of course, with the yellow to keep it from getting too lemony. That's it. Is probably the only area on the surface of the aircraft where the yellow will show to its almost true color because of the light locality. And of course, as I move the brush down and up and down into the dark areas of oil here, the color gets contaminated by the color, and I achieve a blend again, like I did with the rest of the fuselage. So keeping the change of color the same way as the change of color is appearing here, do you see? That otherwise it will form a different shape to the other shape. So this shape has got to be behave the same way, so the light and dark areas, color areas, have got to work in the same way. That's fairly flat, that area there. Now I've got to darken this yellow, and this is where the problems start. To darken it, I'm going to use magenta with and a little bit more cadmium red. Hopefully it will give me sort of a touch of iridium, otherwise it's too strong, just to kill that colour. The best way, I suppose, is to work with complementaries, and with the yellow I suppose I should add a purple, the magenta is a purplish colour with a touch of the iridium, keeps it from going too pink, and that might be too dark, but I just want to straighten it down there a little bit there. That's probably a bit too dark. I have a feeling I'd like to darken this. I much prefer making up my own blacks and dark areas. And by using the two complementaries all through this painting, that's viridian and lyrizian, against one another, I can like a warm or thing. Now, as I darken this into what will hopefully look like black, and I'll use the word look like black rather than black, it will hopefully tell the eye that there's a bit of area of black down here as well. That the rest of the aircraft is in fact silver, viridian and lyrizian, viridian and lyrizian. Here we go. This curvature underneath, it's a black band underneath there. Blue? Don't you believe it? Not blue at all. I'm using, guess what? Viridian and lyrizian to paint the blue of the roundel, of course. But it was a special colour. The blue that they used on the roundel, a very special blue, yes, true. But once having painted it on the aircraft, as it is now flying in this sky, with the shadow in this whole side, both sides of the aircraft in shadow, and the blue and the viridian and lyrizian colour scheme of the sky that I've used, these colours are going to reflect back into the blue of the roundel. Now, you probably won't believe this, but this is going to look like blue in a minute. And I'm just very particular about the shape of this roundel, because although it's round and hand drawn by man on the side of the aircraft, perspective distorts it into some interesting shapes, and If these shapes aren't portrayed accurately, it won't look like a round roundel on the side of the fuselage. That's not there. A little bit of experience and observation comes in. I've pre-drawn it, of course, but since I've painted the fuselage, I've lost sort of the lines, so I'm having to re-establish. So what I'm creating here on the what's supposed to be the blue, the roundel, is what is blue, but a modified blue because of the lighting it's in and the situation it's in. So that's blue. You might still not agree with me at this point, using this proportional dividers, and for doing something like this, for instance, I know that's going to be 6 spaces, so I can check that. 1, 5, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then the width of these, I knew they were wrong, but I need checking, and there's the first problem, first mistake. I should say, I should be thinner. It's there. That's correct. That's got to be narrower. So the blue's got to be narrower. And you should be narrower. And now, how do I measure this curved surface? Well, you've got to do this by eye and come up following the surface of the fuselage. That's smaller. There. Right, that's how to get your spacing right. Now, I'm going to paint white in there, but not white, of course. It's going to be a grey that looks like white. That looks like white. Magenta to tune it down, grey the colour down a little bit. The viridian in red as well, by the way. Yep. And that should be. Yes, I think just dipping my brush into a little cobalt and white, just a cobalt and white. I might just hint that this blue round a little bit too grey there. The nose of the aircraft, and let's do this area. Scrabble in like I did once before. Do a bit on the dark side. That's going to be dark that side as well. I'm not too worried about the colour as such yet. I'm really working in the dark, as it were. The dark areas. Now the engine nacelle is a round, completely circular section near the front, certainly. And so the light areas on here will come down farther than the light areas on here. In fact, this bit of the nose is actually in the front here, but the white here, the light areas here, come down farther. There, come down there. Now, silver on here will pick up, I feel, against the fuselage. So I'm going to put some light area here where I feel the aluminium, not the aluminium, the silver paint will pick up some sort of reflection there. And you need some to carry the paint that you're using on one across to the other. It helps, obviously, to keep the surfaces looking as though they come off from the same sky. And so you're having to try and mix up the colour every time. Keep it looking in one direction. Trimming in. This side, we talk, I don't know. Well, I can still see some of it. No, it's not pure white I'm using here. In fact, I don't want to use white at all, but I'm just, as I said earlier, pushing some oil paint down onto the canvas to wet it, and then I will add to that, reflecting that nice warm sky. I'll add some red and orange, an orangey colour to that, mixing my cadmium yellow and cadmium red to it. That's alright, that's nice. Yes. Not enough. The palette like this. One of the advantages is a more homogeneous painting where the different aircraft in different colours do look like they're sitting in the same bit of sky. Evening sky, sunlit sky, dark sky, whatever. This applies to any subject really, but particularly with man-made metal objects like this, which probably take on the surrounding colours more than probably dull colours, dull surfaces like trees or whatever. Metal surfaces, shiny or slightly matte, do absorb and reflect the surrounding colours, and it gets away from those people who say to themselves, roundel blue, where's a tin of roundel blue, and paint the roundel blue in, and then red and white, and without any concession to the atmosphere around it and the effect that atmosphere has on the surfaces and the colours. If you do that, you really run into trouble, because although you know, you think you've put the right colours down because they have to be covered with the same right coloured 9mm tubes, i.e. red, blue and white, whatever. You're doing a two-dimensional painting, not a model aircraft. Plastic model aircraft is quite a different thing. There you have to take your colours more or less straight out of the right coloured tube and tin of paint. Not so here, otherwise you're in dead trouble. And if you work with a limited palette, it will be surprising how convincing you can make the colours without even using the right colours. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but I found it out a long time ago. For instance, the red, white and blue on top of that, on the top roundel there, is going to be really subdued by the lighting in the pictures, cadmium red and cadmium yellow. Blue crept into it a bit there. Mixture on it across the roundel blue, putting it into that same light. And when I've done that, just kissing the canvas there with the tip of the brush so that I just get the right effect I want. Observing each stroke as I do it, whether it's sufficiently heavy enough or not, and then correct that white there a little bit, and then the red. Get the shaping right. And I want to kill that white down just a little bit more. Too white. There you go. That's a red, white and blue roundel being kissed by sunlight so that it's completely, it's an orange roundel, an orange red, an orange white, an orange blue roundel. How about that? All going to come back at later on, but we've got to get some information down, so we've got to keep working. And yes, it's got to be a carburetor, surely. I know they fitted filters on it. Select the right brush. Put this area here in shadow. And like that. Now soften the edge with a kiss of the brush. I want this darker here. But once I've got that down, shadow, shadow, shadow. Kiss the brush with the edge, soften it down. Bring the shadow down across here. I want shadow, shadow, and get some paint off the brush. That's got to come across there. The sunlight's up there. That's right. Let's get this together here. Lighten that down a bit more. I'm going to take a new brush and mix up Viridian and magenta for the dark area inside the nacelle. That's how dark that's going to get in there. Vector rings for the exhaust. Originally the engines that Bristol made were, these collector rings were in a coppery bronze colour, but as the war went on they just used different steels, I believe, and as a result, like an exhaust pipe, they went to all peculiar colours on the surface. I'll see if I might be eventually do there. Alright? Must remind me to do that before gunmetal grey, which will be different to the silver. So I must remember to put some interesting colours onto that. Here I'm trying a bit of magenta. Bring that round, working with the shape all the time. Try a little bit of blue, a little bit of Silurian there, just to see how they work. Maybe a touch of red. I'm just playing with this thing right now. Viridian to kill that red a bit. Viridian and red go so well together too, because they neutralize each other so well, at the same time producing some very interesting warm greys. Yes, which will be a different grey to the silvery grey we've got from the rest of the aircraft. I'm going to put a touch of yellow in there. Go. Yes. Touch of yellow there. Now, I'm reasonably happy with that. The colour of the spinners, whereas in fact it was natural aluminum or aluminium, depending on which side of the Atlantic you come from. Not to worry, it's been a good exercise showing you how I would treat a painted surface, painted aluminium surface. What I will now do very quickly is to go over very quickly the rest of the aircraft, making it slightly,
making it look like painted, like not painted silver, but actual natural silver. Natural silver.
natural aluminium silver. And really, it wasn't, the British aircraft weren't that well polished natural aluminium silver. So all I think one needs to do is to play up a little bit more on the colours that the aluminium would reflect, i.e. clouds, in this case bouncing back into the surface of the aluminium here. It was rather a dull aluminium finish they used anyway, wasn't, let's say, highly polished. The fabric covered tail surfaces and ailerons, of course, will stay slightly duller, so I'm going to play with those. But there you go. There was a, and now here, where the aluminium on the cowling would probably reflect in here much more, so I'll go to town a bit more on here, and same here. Actually, there'll be some light showing in here, all to be adjusted at a later stage, but this is just to remind me. And at the same time we do that, we'll strengthen the dark areas a little bit more, and I'll probably put in more darks like this. Not a lot of difference. If it was a really highly polished aircraft, that's another matter. These surfaces would become more like a mirror would react in that sort of light, and so I would pay more attention to actual reflections. One would actually probably see the shape of clouds in the side of the aircraft, even if it's a very, very highly polished surface. And, the section of a bullfighter had a peculiar, wasn't a continuous shape all over the top. It came up and then tapered, if you like, along the top. There was a slightly flattened side there, which I was trying to emphasize there a little bit more. But there, that's silvery. It'll do. As I say, I might go in with a heavier tonal change later on. But I'll see how the overall effect comes out. It's a bit early yet to say. I was keep watching the shape of the spin at the same time. And as we come around here, the dark upper sky, which we'll want to reflect into it, blending as we go. I'm not too worried about the back edge of that. I'll right. Probably a purplier, not purple underneath it. And putting a little light in there. Darkening the top there a little bit more. Fairly well polished aluminum spinner there.